She was 23 years old, and she had exactly $1 left, not the kind of broke where you skip brunch and feel dramatic about it. The kind of broke where you sell your engineering textbooks for $22 total, where you pawn your dead mother's wedding ring for $180, less than it was worth, but you didn't have the paperwork to prove it was yours, where you eat peanut butter off a spoon because bread is a luxury, that kind of broke, and with that $1, her last, she bought a building. Before we go further, if this kind of story is why you're here, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. These stories travel further than we expect. Her name was Hannah Reed. She grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, in a small rented duplex with faded yellow siding on the west side of town. Her mother, Deanna, was a nurse who worked 12-hour shifts and still came home and cooked dinner and sat on the front steps at sunset watching the light die behind the rooftops across the street. Her father, Calvin, Vietnam veteran, mechanic, quiet man, had taught her to listen to engines the way other people listen to music. He could hear a horn bearing the way a concert pianist hears a missed note. He died when Hannah was 14. Since then it had been the two of them, mother and daughter, the duplex. The faded yellow siding, holding on. Hannah was her father's daughter in almost every way that mattered. She had his hands long, strong, comfortable with grease and steel. She had his patience, the kind you earn by taking broken things apart slowly, understanding them, then putting them back together. She had his quiet, too. From age 6, she spent every Saturday in the garage behind the duplex, handing Calvin wrenches, watching him fix neighbors' cars for cash. By 10, she could change oil alone. By 12, she could replace a brake pad. By 14, when her father was too sick to work, she had taken over the business entirely, running jobs he started, taking on new ones. So her mother wouldn't have to pick up extra shifts. After Calvin died, a man named Ernesto, her father's old friend, owner of the neighborhood garage, took Hannah under his wing, treated her like a daughter, taught her everything Calvin hadn't had time to: welding, diagnostics, the intricacies of modern fuel injection systems. She absorbed it all the way she absorbed everything, quietly, completely, without needing to be told twice. She graduated high school and enrolled in a community college mechanical engineering program, paid for it herself, garage wages, and the modest survivor benefits from her father's military service. She was good at school. She was especially good at the parts where you worked with actual metal and actual machines. Her instructors liked her. The other students asked her for help. For the first time in her life, she felt like she belonged somewhere. Then her mother got sick. It started small: fatigue, headaches, a persistent cough. Deanna kept telling herself it was a bad flu. By the time she finally agreed to see a doctor, the cancer had spread. Stage 4, lung cancer. Deanna had never smoked a day in her life. The doctors said 6 months. It was 4. Hannah dropped out of school. She moved back into the duplex, slept on the couch so her mother could have the bedroom. She handled everything: the medications, the meals, the bath chair, the insurance calls, the arguments with billing departments. She learned more about how hospitals work in 4 months than she had learned in 2 years of community college. Most of what she learned was this: the system is designed to break people, even when it's trying to help them. Deanna died on a Tuesday morning in late March. 3 weeks before Hannah's 23rd birthday, Hannah was holding her hand. The hospice nurse said it was as peaceful as these things ever are. Hannah would remember that phrase for a long time, never quite sure whether it was a comfort or not. After the funeral, she was alone in the duplex for the first time in her life. The rent was paid through the end of the month. Her mother's paychecks had stopped. The medical bills were enormous. She sold the car, sold the furniture for a fraction of what it was worth, sold her mother's wedding ring to a pawn shop for $180, sold her engineering textbooks to a used bookstore for $22 total. On the 1st of May, the day she left the duplex for the last time, she had a backpack, a duffel bag of clothes, her father's old leather work bag, his tools inside, and $91 in her bank account. She had no family left, no one close enough to ask for more than a week on a couch. She caught a bus heading east. East was the direction she could afford. She ended up in Plumley, Iowa. Population, 312, because that's where her money ran out. $18 when she stepped off. The bus had made an unscheduled stop for engine trouble. Hannah had walked into the town's only diner to use the bathroom. When she came back out, the bus was gone. She wasn't sure if she'd missed it on purpose or by accident. She sat in the diner for 2 hours, nursing coffee she could barely afford, staring out the window at a town that was clearly dying. Half the storefronts boarded, the other half with handwritten signs, closing sale, everything must go. A grain elevator rising at the end of the street like a concrete cathedral, still running, surrounded by empty parking lots. A church with a for sale sign in the yard. And across the street from the diner, a small red brick building with tall, narrow windows and a weathered green door. Above the door, carved in stone so old parts of it had worn away, U.S. Post Office. A rusted flagpole stood out front. No flag, ivy crawling up one side. Weeds pushing through the cracked front steps. Hannah stared at it. A waitress in her 50s, gray braid, name tag that read Maribel, came by with the coffee pot and sat down across from her, uninvited. "You look like you're thinking hard about something, sugar." Hannah pointed at the post office. "When did that close?" "Oh, that old thing." Maribel glanced across the street. 1987. Postal Service consolidated everything down to Mount Pleasant. Been sitting empty ever since. Last I heard, the county was selling it for $1. Just to get it off their books. Hannah looked back at the building. $1. That's what I heard. My cousin Doreen works at the county office. Says there's a form you fill out. Maribel shrugged. But you'd have to be crazy to buy it. Nobody knows what shape it's in after 40 years. Hannah sat there and thought. She thought about her $18. She thought about Omaha, which had too many ghosts in it now. She thought about what it meant to own something, not rent it, not borrow it, own it. A place where no one could slide an eviction notice under the door. A place where the collection calls couldn't reach her. A place to stand, even if it was falling apart. Even if it was in a dying town she'd never heard of until 2 hours ago. "Where's the county office?" she asked. Maribel smiled. 3 blocks down, corner of Oak and Main. "You want me to call Doreen and let her know you're coming?" "Yes, ma'am." "If you don't mind." By the time Hannah walked 3 blocks to the county office, Doreen was already pulling up the file. She walked Hannah through it step by step. The building had been listed as surplus federal property. Title transferred to the county in 2009 after years of failed auctions. Since 2010, available for $1 to anyone willing to take over the tax obligation and bring the structure up to code within 18 months. "But the code part is the catch," Doreen said. "If it's not certified safe in 18 months, it reverts back. Nobody's managed it yet." Last person who tried gave up after 6 months when she found out the foundation repair alone was going to cost $14,000. Hannah thought about $14,000. It was less than the medical bill she'd already walked away from, less than a year of rent in Omaha. And it was an amount that could, in theory, be earned if she had a place to live while she was earning it. "I'd like to claim the building, please." Doreen looked at her for a long moment. Then she pulled out the form. The whole process took 40 minutes. It ended with Doreen handing her a large brass key on a wooden tag that said PLUMLYPO in careful handwriting. The key was heavy. It had the weight of something used every day for decades and then not touched for decades more. "Good luck, honey," Doreen said. I mean that. Hannah stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of the post office and looked up at it. Single-story red brick, maybe 30 feet wide, 50 feet long. The carved stone lintel. The rusted flagpole, the boarded windows. She put the key in the lock was stiff, but it turned. She pushed the door open. The smell hit her first. Old paper, old wood, dust. And underneath that, the chemical ghost of what the building had been. Rubber stamps, mimeograph ink, government tissue floor wax, all of it faint, all of it still there. She stepped inside. A row of brass post office boxes lined the left wall, glass windows intact, tiny brass number plates on every one. They looked exactly as they had on the last day anyone used them. Some still had mail inside, letters and magazines from 1987 that had never been claimed. To the right, a polished wooden service counter with an ornate brass grill rising from it. Behind the grill, sorting shelves, cubbyholes for outgoing mail. On the wall behind the counter, a framed portrait of Ronald Reagan, still hanging, slightly crooked, his faded photograph smiling out at a lobby that had been empty for 40 years. The floor was tile, small black and white octagons, dulled by time but still beautiful. The ceiling was pressed tin, painted white, with a single brass light fixture in the center. A small wooden table against one wall, where customers had once filled out forms, a pencil still resting on it, like someone had just set it down and walked away. Hannah moved slowly through the lobby, then through the swinging gate in the brass grill, into the back room, sorting tables, pigeonhole shelves full of old paperwork, an ancient adding machine on a metal desk, a rack of coat pegs on the wall where mail carriers had once hung their jackets, and at the far end of the room, set into the wall, a heavy steel door. The vault. It was squat and dark green with gold lettering, U.S. Government Property Postal Inspector, a round combination dial in the center, a brass handle dark with age. A small engraved plate beside it, Federal Postal Vault Keep Secure. Hannah reached out. She tried the handle, it turned. The vault wasn't locked. She stood there a moment, staring at the unlocked handle. Then she pulled. The heavy door swung open on its hinges with a long, low metallic groan, the sound of something that had not moved in decades. Inside, a small steel-lined chamber maybe 4 feet deep and 4 feet wide, shelves along both walls. On the right, leather-bound ledgers stacked neatly, government property labeled by year. 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, every day's business for almost 50 years recorded in the handwriting of whichever clerk had been on duty. On the left, strong boxes. Small steel boxes with carrying handles and padlocks, and on the back shelf between the ledgers and the strong boxes, 3 canvas mail sacks, old-fashioned, leather drawstrings. Brass tags stamped, USPS property. The sacks were full, bulging. Hannah lifted one. It was heavy. She carried it out to a sorting table, opened the drawstring and looked inside. Hundreds of letters. Old letters stamped and addressed, some with return addresses, some without. She picked one up at random. The postmark was 1983. The envelope yellowed but intact. The letter had never been delivered. She picked up another. 1979. Another. 1985. All undelivered, all from before the post office closed. She opened the second sack. More letters, the third. More still. Hannah stood in the dim back room of the abandoned post office and tried to understand what she was looking at. Before computerized tracking, rural post offices sometimes accumulated undeliverable mail, letters with wrong addresses, letters to people who'd moved, letters that simply had nowhere to go. Most offices sent these to regional dead letter facilities. But some, especially small ones, ones where the staff knew everyone in town, kept the letters, hoping the rightful owners might someday come back to claim them. When Plumley's post office closed in 1987, these sacks were supposed to be forwarded. They weren't. They'd been sitting in this vault for 40 years, waiting. Hannah turned to the strongboxes. She broke the first padlock off with 3 sharp hits from a hammer she found in an old desk drawer, lifted the lid. Money orders. Stacks of postal money orders filled out, each for a specific amount, each to a specific recipient. None of them had been cashed. 1983, 1984, 1985, 1986, 1987. She broke open the second box. More money orders in cash. Old bills bundled with paper bands. The third box held cash and a few small items, watches, rings, a silver compact. Things that had arrived in the mail with undeliverable addresses and been placed in the vault for safekeeping. Hannah sat down on the cold tile floor. She counted the cash, over $16,000 in old bills. Then she noticed something on top of the ledger stack on the right shelf, a small envelope, hand-addressed in careful fountain pen script. It said, "To whoever finds this, please open." She opened it. "My name is Marjorie Everett. I was the postmaster of Plumley, Iowa from 1964 until the office closed in June 1987. I'm writing this on my last day on the job. The Postal Service is closing us down next week and transferring everything to Mount Pleasant. I have been going through the vault in preparation for the transfer, and I find myself unable to send these particular items on. The letters in the canvas sacks are undeliverable mail that I have been holding for years, in some cases, decades, in the hope that the rightful recipients would one day come to claim them. Most of them will never be claimed. The recipients have moved away or died or were misaddressed to people who never existed at all. Sending them to a dead letter office in some distant city feels like a betrayal. These letters were meant for our community. They should stay here. The money orders are a different story. Many of them are from people in Plumley who sent birthday money or Christmas money to children or grandchildren who had moved away without leaving a forwarding address. I kept them in hopes that someone would eventually ask. No one ever did. After 20 years of waiting, I concluded that the rightful owners were either dead or no longer cared. The cash and the small items came from various sources. Money tucked into holiday cards that couldn't be delivered. A wristwatch sent by a man to his son. A silver compact meant for an estranged sister. Things that had no return address. Things sent from places we could no longer reach. I've been safekeeping all of these for decades, partly because it was my job. Partly because the thought of sending them to a government warehouse, where they would simply be lost, felt like finalizing a grief I was not ready to finalize. I am leaving everything here because I do not have the strength to destroy it or the authority to distribute it. If you are reading this letter, you have somehow come to own this building. And by extension, you now possess these unclaimed mails. Do with them what you think is right. Try to find the recipients if you can. Many of them cannot be found. Those that cannot, keep the contents for yourself. You have earned them by being the person who cared enough to walk into this vault in the first place. Plumley was a good town once. It is a dying town now. Whatever you do with this building, please remember that it was a place where people came to send their love to each other, and sometimes their love got lost on the way. Try to do right by the lost love if you can. Sincerely, Marjorie Everett, June 30th, 1987. Hannah read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully, pressed it against her chest, and sat on the cold tile floor of the old post office back room, surrounded by 3 sacks of undelivered letters, 3 strongboxes of money and memory, and cried for the first time since her mother died. If you're finding this story, keep going. Subscribe. Tell us in the comments, have you ever sent a letter that never arrived? Hannah did not sleep in the post office that first night. She secured the vault contents, locked the building, and walked back to Maribel's diner. Maribel listened to the whole story over a grilled cheese, then called her sister-in-law, who ran a bed and breakfast on the edge of town, and got Hannah a room for a week at half price. The next morning, Hannah went back to work. She sorted the money orders by year. She was stunned to learn that postal money orders never expire. They remain valid forever. Over the following weeks, she cashed $22,000 worth of them. Most were for small amounts, $25, $50, $100, but together they added up. The cash in the strongboxes came to $16,400. And at the bottom of the third strongbox, inside a small felt pouch, she found 2 gold wedding bands and a diamond engagement ring that a coin dealer in Burlington later valued at $8,200. The $14,000 foundation repair turned out to be $9,000 once a local contractor actually looked at it. The roof needed work, not replacement. The electrical had to be rebuilt from scratch. New plumbing from the street. She did everything she could with her own hands, called in favors she'd built from fixing cars at Maribel's for cash. The building had a kind of dignity that new buildings don't. Thick brick walls, solid wood doors, pressed tin ceiling, a tile floor laid by hand in 1908. Hannah resolved, as she worked, to preserve everything she could, but she spent more time on the letters than on the renovation. She went through all 3 mail sacks, separated them by decade, identified the ones with partial addresses that might still be traceable, researched names at the Plumlee Public Library, back issues of the local paper, census records, then drove 40 miles to the bigger library in Ottawa to access wider databases. It was slow work. Afternoons for renovation, evenings for research. Over the course of her first year in Plumlee, Hannah delivered 47 letters, 47 out of almost 300. She found recipients in Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, California, Florida. Some were the original addressees. Some were their children receiving mail sent to a parent who had been dead for decades. Some were grandchildren. Some of the letters were birthday cards. Some were love letters. Some were formal business notices. 2 contained uncashed insurance checks which, though expired, the insurance companies honored as a gesture of goodwill when Hannah called. The reactions were unlike anything she had experienced. People wept on the phone with her. A 74-year-old woman in Cedar Rapids sobbed for 10 minutes when Hannah read her a birthday card her long-dead mother had sent in 1984 for her 35th birthday. A man in Wisconsin received a letter his father had written him the week before dying, a letter the man had never known existed. Several recipients drove to Plumlee just to meet her, just to collect their letters in person, to say thank you. The post office became, by accident, a place where strangers came to receive news that was 40 years late. Hannah opened the building to the public after 9 months, not as a post office that would require federal certification, but as something else, a community space, the restored tile floor, the pressed tin ceiling, the brass post office boxes still intact along the wall. She named it the Plumlee Letter Room. She launched a volunteer effort to find recipients for the remaining mail. The local paper ran a story, then a regional paper, then an NPR segment that aired on a Sunday morning and reached thousands of people, including a producer at a national outlet who wanted to go deeper. The national story ran 6 months later. Within a week, Hannah had over 400 emails from people who had grown up in Plumlee or had family who had, all of them asking if any of the letters might be for them. By the end of her second year, she had delivered 211 of the roughly 300 letters. The remaining ones, she concluded, would never find their recipients. She archived them in acid-free boxes on the shelves of the old vault, waiting, the way Marjorie had kept them waiting before her. Hannah built a small apartment in the back of the building. in the space that had once been the sorting room. She kept the front half as the letter room, open to anyone who wanted to come sit in the old lobby, look at the brass boxes and the tin ceiling, and remember that this had once been the place where love traveled across distances. Ernesto from Omaha came to visit after a year. He walked through the building shaking his head and laughing. "Your daddy would have been so proud of you," he said. "Not for the money. For what you did with it." One evening in late September of her second year in Plumley, Hannah sat on the front step of the post office and watched the sun go down behind the grain elevator at the end of the street. The town was still dying, technically, population still declining, storefronts still closing, but something had shifted since the letter room opened. People came to Plumley now, not many, but some. They ate at Marable's diner. They bought gas at the one gas station. They stayed a night at the bed and breakfast. The money wasn't enough to save the town, but it was enough to slow things down. Enough to remind Plumley that it still existed. Hannah thought about Marjorie Everett, the postmaster who had locked 3 sacks of undelivered letters in a vault in 1987 because she couldn't bear to send them to a government warehouse. A woman who had understood that mail was never really about paper. It was about the attempt. The moment someone sits down and writes what they are feeling, seals it, stamps it, hands it to a stranger, trusts that stranger to carry those feelings across a distance to someone who is waiting. Mail is faith made physical, and when the delivery fails, the faith doesn't disappear. It just gets stored somewhere, waiting. She thought about her father, Calvin, who taught her to listen to engines and to be patient with broken things. She thought about her mother, Diana, who held everything together for 14 years and sat with Hannah on the front steps at sunset eating peanut butter sandwiches. She thought about her own 4 months of caregiving, which had felt like the hardest thing she had ever done, and which had, in retrospect, prepared her exactly for this. For sitting patiently with old paper, for tracing the threads of old stories back through time to the people who had been waiting for them. That's the thing about mail that never arrived. It wasn't lost, it was waiting, waiting for someone patient enough to pick up each envelope and ask, who was this meant for? Is that person still reachable? And if not, who would have wanted to know what it said? The world is full of waiting things, letters in vaults, buildings in dying towns. People in rented duplexes who lost both parents before they turned 23, and sometimes, rarely, the waiting things find each other. The building waits for the person walks into the town. The vault unlocks with a turn of a handle that hadn't been locked in 40 years, because Marjorie Everett, on the last day of her career, had decided to leave the door just barely closed so that whoever came next would not need a combination. Hannah Reed was 23 years old. She had $1. She spent it on an abandoned post office in a dying town in rural Iowa. It was the best dollar she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, is there a letter you wish you had written, or one you wish you had received? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.